Welcome to Universal Man. My name is Mark Queppet, aka Commander Q, and I'm here to help you reign victorious on the battlefield of the will so that you can conquer yourself and unleash your apex potential. And we are back with the Universal Man podcast number 2. Last podcast seemed to do really pretty well. You guys seem to enjoy the conversation, so we're sticking with the format. And we have us again joined by my young ward, James. How you doing, James?
I'm very well, my friend. I really enjoyed last time, to be honest with you. So I'm looking forward to this podcast.
Yeah, it was a good time. So we've got some fun stuff to cover today. We're going to be talking a little bit about dark dopamine, NoNut November 2020, and we're going to be also looking at politics a little bit. We're going to be talking about how to talk about politics because stuff's just getting crazy, and I can share my own personal anecdotes around what that's been like lately and the rules that I've come up with for myself. So let's go ahead and start getting into this. And my opening thought really is about this idea I'm calling dark dopamine. Okay. Now, some of the Poindexters out there, they've given me shit in my videos in the past, particularly like my dopamine detox video, where they're like, excuse me, you can't quit dopamine. Like, you can't just, like, this isn't how it works. And it's like, I know that. Like, the idea of detoxing from dopamine is like an oversimplification of how our brains work and everything like that. Like, dopamine, you can't live without dopamine. Dopamine is an essential neurotransmitter that governs a lot of different stuff. James probably knows more about that than I do, but I know at the very least, like, you need it 100%, and it's not a bad thing. Right, James? What does it actually do other than motivation?
Oh, it does loads and loads and loads of things. The main one, which I find really funny, is it's involved in motor function. So if you do a proper dopamine detox, you will literally be unable to move, drooling on the floor. It's like, well, lads, that's probably not what we want, really. But, I know, like, your audience will understand this, but it's like, I see some of the emails that come in, which is quite a lot, and some of them are fairly alarming in the understanding of theory. Obviously, I can understand why people might get that from the sensationalism of such stuff. It's just good to sort of get the science in once in a while, I think. Yeah.
The big thing that we're trying to cut out here, this idea that I have around dark dopamine, if you're on the daily email, you saw my email about that. It's just the idea that you're getting dopamine, you're getting that, like, mental juice, you're getting that anticipation from something that doesn't really serve you. Basically, your brain has attached a reward cue to something that's not actually rewarding, right? And so there's a million different ways in which we fall into this trap today. So, like, that greasy McDonald's food, your brain sends this signal like, oh, that's super valuable to your survival, because that's the way, our bodies are wired to think super high calorie, high salt, crap like that is, like, really good for you. When in reality, it's actually not. It's not very nutritionally sound for us. So our brain attaches a faulty reward sensation to it. All right. And this shows up in a bunch of different places. Obviously, porn is one of the big ones we talk about here. That's probably, is that, like, officially the most potent, like, non-exogenously induced, like, dopamine spike you can get? Like, that's artificial?
I would presume so, yeah, because, like, you can use pornography to completely remove, like, panic attacks and anxiety. Not clinically tested, but, for example, if you're going to look at something that's going to take you out of a anxiety state, pornography is probably the thing that would suck you in the most.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, what else could it possibly be besides that?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it would have to be that, right? Other than, like, maybe some kind of other, like then it would be, like, real case-by-case sort of thing where someone's, like, created some super weird, like, behavioral addiction or, I mean, other than that, it's pretty much just like crystal meth and cocaine and that kind of stuff. Like, that's gonna get on that level. So, like, yeah, that one's a big spike. Obviously, it doesn't serve you super well, causes all these kinds of problems and whatnot. But we'll get into that a little bit more with NoNut November. But, like, I would say that if you're being really honest with yourself, this kind of stuff shows up everywhere in your life. And this is something that me, even being on this path for years, like, I'm still doing, like, deep cleaning, right? I'm still figuring out exactly what activities really serve me and what activities really just stimulate me but don't actually serve me in the long run. So it's like, everything from junk food to social media to internet surfing to sometimes even just, like, compulsively chatting with friends and stuff like that. Even good things can turn to being some sort of dark stimulation, unhelpful stimulation after a while, right? And this is all, pretty straightforward stuff. Everyone understands this. But the big thing I see is that we get into this mindset where the goal feels like balance. We need to kind of have our bad, naughty stuff and mostly good stuff. And as long as we keep it in balance, we're fine. Like, eat healthy most of the time. And then, you have your cheat day on the weekend where you pound junk food and that sort of thing. And on one hand, this can work. You can find a level of stability in it. But for me personally, I've always found it to be a very vulnerable sort of cycle where, especially when you swing into that indulgent side, it's super difficult to moderate. It's not impossible. You can do it. But it opens up the door for things to go south. Like, so for example, if I go back into solo competitive video games and I'm just like, I'll just try it out. I'll just play it on weekends, or I'll just play it with friends or whatever. Before long, I'm like, wasting hours of my time doing it, because that's the way our brain is designed to respond to this kind of stuff. There's this binge behavior that seems to override our rational faculty. So like, obviously porn was one of those big things for me in the past, like that. Video games has been something like that. Hell, even like fantasy novels. Like if I start reading a fantasy novel or watching some show, like I'll feel like I can't stop until I'm done with it. And moderating it feels extremely difficult. Am I alone in this, James, or would you agree with me?
No, I definitely agree with you. I say, first of all, would you mind turning me up? Because some of the guys in the chat are saying that I'm very, very quiet. Not entirely sure why. But I guess while you do
Try
that, yeah, I completely agree with you. One of the things I've done in my life is basically to cut all of that stuff out sort of naturally over time. Of course, we can go on and talk about this, but it's like there's not really an option to do that in sort of like day to day. Talking about like in the last episode about social media, it's like I don't have those accounts.
Right.
They're like business-based accounts. I just was like, no more. But yeah, they're incredibly seductive because it's an evolutionary mismatch. Those things that are going to be good for our adaptation and survival to whatever niche that we happen to be in, we've inherited those things. And so, I mean, but the difference is we've evolved a higher level of consciousness, quote unquote. I know that's a woo-woo phrase, than say the other animals, in that we're more reflexive than the other animals. The evidence seems to be. So really the test is, can you use that to redirect where your instincts are going to in those immediate moments, away from, say, sugary food and towards something which consciously to be nutritional. Of course, that does generate some amount of pain, but sometimes that's necessary.
Right. And the real issue is that our technology for feeding these kind of, vices has really outstripped our internal technology of self-control. And, particularly because you can make a lot of money. If you can press people's pleasure buttons, you can make money, plain and simple, right? And hopefully I did turn up your volume. I think every time we test the mics, you talk closer and louder. And then when we get on the actual stream, you like move back and talk quieter. But let me know if that's better.
So someone said that the volume's better now.
Okay. All right, good. With the, but with this though, like, the thing that I've found, and the thing that I had to kind of like really learn on a deep level, like how to do, was this idea that, all right, the solution is not going to be found in maintaining this proper balance of the pendulum where we swing one way sometimes and one way the other time. It's kind of more along the line of what you said, where it's actually about reconditioning our tastes so that like ultimately like the goal would be to have, instead of separating our work from our play, we want our work to feel like play, and we want our play to be productive. We want it to energize us, to make our life better rather than be something that we have to recover from. Like, so for example, if I was going to contrast who I was in college, like who I was in college is I was doing work that I absolutely hated because I didn't know myself. And I didn't have a knowledge of how I could live better. So I was doing this computer science stuff that I sucked at, that I hated, and it was just like all just painful work. And then on the weekends, my play was just like, the basic college debauchery of drinking, partying, sex, drugs, all that kind of stuff. And like that broke me down. Both things broke me down, just in different ways. So it was kind of like this lifestyle where you'd pendulum swing in one way, you'd hurt yourself, and then while you were sort of recovering, you'd just hurt yourself in another way. And like that's how I think most people are, even even if it's not as extreme, right? They'll work a job that they hate. They'll come home. They'll like, pound a 6-pack, and like that's their swing. And they think, oh, well, maybe, I could try and get a little bit better of a job, or maybe I could drink not so many beers and that sort of thing. But again, I think that's the wrong strategy. You have to be trying to think of how can you synthesize these things. And it's not an easy process, but it's one that like ultimately what it requires is you to understand that your tastes can change if you give yourself the appropriate conditioning time and internal support and external support. So for example, like the idea for like me back in the day trying to quit porn, that was something that literally felt impossible, because like when I would try to quit, it felt like I was dying. But you go through the reconditioning process, all of a sudden, like if I see porn now, it actually like it makes me kind of sick. Like it's like I don't want to see it. Like, yeah, there's a part that's still aroused by, beautiful women, but like there's another part that sees it for what it is, and I've reconditioned it so it's like there's no longer the overwhelming attraction and everything to it. And this can go through everything. Like you can recondition your taste buds. People, you hear about this sometimes where people like, they eat really unhealthy, and then all of a sudden they have a health scare. The doctor says they need to clean up their life, and they eat super clean, and all of a sudden the old junk food they used to love is now disgusting to them, right? And it's this kind of transformation that really we should be aiming for. You see, am I making sense here?
Yeah. I mean, it's like you have the example of the guy going home and having a 6-pack. It's like, well, that's serving a part of that individual's homeostasis, and so to just remove that in a vacuum of everything in his entire life, it's like that's so low resolution. It's, for example, why you've developed something like the Reforged Man course, to be like, you can't just quit. And like it is serving a purpose. No matter how much you might dislike a vice, 99% of the time it's serving a purpose, and it is a part of you for a reason. So it does require a level of intelligence, self-insight, and therefore by necessity forgiveness of yourself for doing it, or else that's how the cycle keeps going. Because I've been in those same situations as yourself, actually, where it's like you swing one way then the other on like a daily or a weekly basis, and that would go on for years and years until I completely stepped back, removed the frame, and came in via a different way. And that was more in terms of lifespan development and potential and stuff like that, which was far more useful than, well, I shouldn't drink beers anymore. It's like, it's just not going to work, mate.
Right, exactly. And so one of the things I found, so for example, like I would get really hooked into shows or, sci-fi or fantasy novels, and, I would just like feel compelled to escape into them. And I realized part of it was because I felt like I needed to have more adventure. I needed to have like more novelty. I needed to have more stuff that I was exploring and learning about. And what I did is I just got more adventurous with my job. I started to expand the Vanguard. I expanded my scope of what I was trying to do. That was the transition out of, just the NoFap Academy into Universal Man. And, it's the dreams I have for the work now are crazy. And for all the stuff that I want to do, there's all these different resources that I can read. I'm reading so much like more nonfiction stuff because the real world is crazy enough. And I'm not saying fiction is bad, but for me, it was an escape that I didn't need to really escape in order to get. Like I was living a life that allowed just as much adventure in the real world, where the adventures would actually be productive to me rather than just something I'm living out in my mind that disappears once the book's over. And so like, this is the way you got to start thinking about it. Like in reference to that, the guy who goes home and drinks a 6-pack, you got to ask, well, what's he getting out of that? What's another way he could get that thing that would serve him better? Maybe he's actually probably a prime candidate for an exercise routine, or maybe like some kind of even like breathing routine or meditation or prayer, or maybe he's just lonely. Maybe he needs to be the guy who like joins a social club or like volunteers, or just finds a way that he goes and he connects with people. Like we all have different things that we need, and often we just fill those needs unconsciously, and then we feel like we need to somehow like fight against them. But that's not really the right case. It's just replace them with something better. Like it seems like real. Is this like an overly obvious point, or is this something that?
No. I mean, it seems to be when you say it, but no, because people fall into that trap all the time. It's kind of like I'm back at day zero with anything. And it's like, okay, so take the guy with the six pack as an example, right? Okay, what's it doing to him? Well, it's relaxing him and it's also animating him. And then what? It's like, okay, you got your wife that you're not really talking to. And it's like, okay, why don't you try fix your relationship? Because then you won't have need for that anymore, because you get your relaxation, your sense of home, your sense of confirmation, everything from her, which is far better than drinking the six pack. And I think a lot of it, when you're saying about lonely, personally, I think that's the real key one. Is like, even when you're watching, say, a YouTube video or you're reading a book, it's still like a pseudo bit of social contact sort of to pull you up. But to join some kind of community and to go out with friends, obviously that's difficult under our current cultural conditions. Yeah. That I really think that would be ideal, because you completely change who you are around other people in terms of where your energy goes to moment to moment. If you're by yourself, your energy is not going to go to the six pack. Sorry, it is going to go to the six pack, but if you're with your friends, it might not do that. It's way less, because your energy is taken up by that group dynamic. So yeah, it's just a case of flipping and being intelligent with things.
Yeah. So that was the big thing I was thinking about recently, and I felt like that was a good topic to talk about here. So hopefully you guys got something out of that. You see some place where maybe you need to try and create a new synthesis between your pleasure and your play, and it's challenging to figure out how to go about all that reconditioning stuff. But if you check out any of my other material, particularly the first 2 episodes of the Man of Action series that we have on here, they talked about how to kick out like old, unwanted dopamine addictions and replace them with other things. So check that out if you're interested. So moving on here, we have NoNut November coming up. So that's basically the national holiday for this channel. Because I don't for some of you guys, maybe you don't even know, like I was one of the first dudes who put his face on talking about like porn addiction back 7 years ago or whatever it was. Like there was no one who was talking about NoFap or anything like that. Maybe like 1 or 2 guys did like 1 video on it or something. But that's where I initially like piled in, and I even partnered with Alexander Rhodes, the creator of NoFap and current proprietor, runner of it, whatever you want to call it. And I was kind of like the NoFap's like official coach for a little while, and we ran the NoFap Academy and all that kind of stuff. And at some point, when did NoNut November really become a thing? Was it like 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, it wasn't a big thing while I was into the NoFap stuff as like a developmental thing. It came afterwards. Yeah, so it must have been the last 3 years or so.
Yeah, it started as like an internet meme, kind of like how NoFap did. And the general principle is that you just, there's zero nutting during November, and that's pretty much the only rule. These are the meme rules, okay? It's just like you just can't orgasm. You can watch porn, you can do whatever kind of crazy stuff you want, you just can't orgasm. And then it's supposedly followed by Destroy Dick December, where instead of, you take it in the opposite direction, where you masturbate apparently once on day 1, then twice on day 2, 3 times on day 3, 4 times, et cetera, until apparently your dick is destroyed. So that's the meme-ish origins, but it's kind of like caught on to a thing to the point where like the memes were so funny that like so many people kind of just keyed in on it that it actually started like a real conversation around porn use, masturbation, and all that kind of stuff. And it actually has brought a lot of attention to this movement, and people who tried the challenge or whatever, they realize, oh wow, I'm hyper addicted to this. And every once in a while they come across some good information about porn addiction, and then they realize, oh wow, this is a real problem, and I need to quit.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the, it's a meme thing that's going around, and people try and do it. It's like, you're probably not doing it for the right reasons. And it's like, that's probably why, one of the reasons why people can't pass is that it's because of a meme thing. It's like, you need to be doing things for the right reasons. Whereas when things get tough, you're going to abandon ship.
Sure.
Sure.
So, I mean, let's real quick talk about some of the reasons why you might want to take NoNut November seriously. I'll just list them off the top of my head because I have other videos where I go like in depth on this, and most of you guys probably already know this, but like sexual dysfunction get healed. A lot of guys have erectile dysfunction due to heavy porn use. The brain gets trained to thinking that sex is between a mouse and a keyboard rather than a real woman. Sometimes guys have delayed ejaculation, extreme fetishes. So that's like in the sexual realm. But then you have stuff like unable to motivate, depression, unable to focus on things. This is kind of ties into the dopamine stuff. You're just so used to getting this super hyper stimulated thing. It's almost like if you're staring into like the sun and then you go into a dimly lit room, it could be an amazingly beautiful dimly lit room, but you can't see it because your eyes are desensitized. That's kind of like how your motivation system is a little bit. What am I missing?
Well, do you know that too much nutting can actually cause headaches? This is one of the strangest ones. If you compulsively nut all the time in the absence of any kind of actualization, there is decent evidence that you just develop these like strange headaches that come on. I forget where it is, but it's a certain part of the head that when you go to nut again, you can't do it because the headache gets too painful. Very weird.
Weird.
Yeah.
Huh. That's intense. I probably used
A
to have
nutting
this.
migraine.
Yeah. And then obviously there's like social ramifications and deeper stuff with like relationships. And if you're a porn addict, you know, you're not gonna be able to connect the best with your partner intimately, all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, I've talked about this more in other places. What I really want to talk about is just how important particularly this NoNut November is, because 2020 has been a crazy year. We can all agree with this. And in many ways, this makes this NoNut November like the hardest one, and maybe the hardest one ever. Assuming things get better and we don't have another serious lockdown again. Even if we have another lockdown again, people are going to be more used to it. Okay, but like this is pretty intense. So everyone's stressed out. You know, the economy is tenuous. You might be having job issues. You know, you might be forced to completely end your routines. Maybe you're working from home. Maybe your relationships are struggling. I know I heard something like domestic abuse has like skyrocketed, like child abuse has skyrocketed, divorce has skyrocketed. So, you know, and then also we have people with massive isolation. So it's like the relationships people do have are strained. And then a whole chunk of people just not having relationships anymore because they're not getting out. And so like it's a real shit show.
Yeah. It's did you mention suicide? Because that's on the rise as well, especially in young men, because status is so important for young men. It's one of the reasons why they're using pornography and stuff like that as like a temporary status maintainer. Right. And so if you lose your job under lockdown, it's like, okay, what next?
Yeah.
It's almost like the genome goes recycle, and it's Freud talked about it. It's a thing called thanatos. It's quite terrifying, really. So, you know, there's lots of huge consequences, mate.
Yeah. And then you throw like the severe like social upheaval and like massive political tension on top of it. Like people are turning to porn to just bliss out, and now comes NoNut November, and I think most people are really going to struggle and probably not even going to attempt it. But here's my case to you as to why you absolutely should because of this, all right? First off, like when you quit porn, usually you're not going to be at your peak. People talk about the nofap superpowers. That's really kind of a lie. You might get bursts of like clarity and insight during the recovery process, but most of the benefits, they really all come after the fact. They come like after you've like really kind of reconditioned your brain. I'm talking like 90, 120 days plus, okay? But during the process, for the most part, you're gonna feel like shit, and you're not gonna be your most productive self. And anyone who tries to just like quit porn and become hyper productive almost always fails, because the raw reality is that sometimes you're just gonna be. It takes a lot of willpower. It takes a lot of mental effort, and if you're doing it right, you got to put time and energy into building the right disciplines, you know, doing the right accountability processes, all that kind of stuff. And so you're not going to be your most productive self. But no one's their most productive self right now. So like you kind of get this stealth cover where like even if you're not your best self while during this NoNut November, it doesn't matter because no one else is, because the world's on fire, kind of. So that's one big piece of it. But then on top of that, if you are the guy who goes through this process, maybe you kickstart your porn addiction recovery and you get to the other side and you do quit, well, then you're going to stand out that much more, because people's functioning in general, I think, has gone down significantly due to all of this. And so if you're one of the guys who can actually take your functioning up a notch while everyone else is being taken down, then like the amount you stand to gain from quitting porn right now is also greater than it's ever been before. So like, I'm telling you guys, like this is the time. This is like ultimate hard mode. And if you really commit during this period, I think you're gonna probably see some of the biggest benefits you could possibly see.
So how's somebody going to go about doing that?
So, all right, there's a few different things, and I have a whole series called the Sexual Self-Mastery series that's free on YouTube here. Check that out. I talk about that a lot. There's another thing that I highly recommend to all of you if you're serious about it. I have this guide called the Reboot Regimen, and you can get it by clicking the link in the description below. And that's kind of like the ultimate beginner's guide for quitting porn. But I'll give you the big takeaways here that will help you get jump started and whatnot. And the very first thing is that you can't just white knuckle your way through this. It's not going to work. I can 100% guarantee you that it's not going to work. And white knuckling is the idea that you're just going to kind of use some kind of abstract internal pushing to like make yourself not do it. All right? That doesn't work. Like that's kind of just like holding your breath. Like when you've conditioned yourself to doing something, that only works as long as you're really paying attention. And then as soon as like, you can't hold your breath anymore, you take a breath, or in other words, you just kind of become unconscious, you go on autopilot for a second, you're just going to be watching porn before you know it. And so like what you have to do then is you have to actually build in replacements. You can't just not try and think about porn. That induces this whole pink elephant problem where if I say, don't think about porn, don't think about porn, don't think about porn, it's kind of like saying, don't think about a pink elephant, don't think about a pink elephant. Like, what do? You think about a pink elephant thing. And so like, if you just try to avoid porn, it's going to end in a disaster for you. So that's rule number one. Anything to add to that, James?
No, but we do have a super chat, mate. It comes from Brett Munger. He says, hey, Mark, thanks for what you do. Thanks for what you do for men and giving us the tools to succeed.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks so much for your support. I really appreciate that, my friend. And in your honor, we'll go into tip number 2, okay? Tip number 2 is, all right, if we can't just white knuckle it, we have to make some specific changes. We have to do something. And the first thing we want to do is we want to look at our patterns, okay? What is your typical, porn use pattern? That's pretty much what you got to do. You got to identify it. Does it happen late at night? Does it happen under a certain set of emotional conditions where you're really stressed? Does it happen like every single time you get rejected by a girl? Like, understand your patterns, and once you understand them, you can make adjustments so that things are easier, right? So it's like if you always relapse after a certain time at night, well, you could set up a rule for yourself where it's like you don't use the computer after a certain time. Maybe you don't bring your cell phone into your bed if that's always where it happens, or into the bathroom, or whatever your pattern is. So it's like you got to start doing a little bit of detective work. And if you can do that, and you can set up counter patterns, then that's going to go a long way.
I'm curious, actually, from your coaching experience, what's the most common pattern that you've seen that's come up?
Let me think. I mean, there's a bunch of them. The external patterns, I mean, like probably just being alone and at night are big ones. For people who are trying to quit, usually that's when it happens. Is like when you're later at night, because later in the day is when your willpower is lower usually, and so that's just the way it is, and you're usually not as busy, so that's the one you want to watch out for.
Yeah, okay. So imagine if you get up for work at 8 or something, and you go to work at 9, chances are you're probably not going to bend over and crack out a cheeky nut. Highly unlikely. Maybe you can do it if you're very, very fast, and some people are very, very fast. But it makes sense. Having things to do would really, really help with that.
Crack out a cheeky nut. That's a good one.
Yeah, mate. You just lean over the bed and you squeeze one out straight into the sink.
God. Moving on. Next tip is going to be you want to be able to talk to yourself, okay? Because if you're just operating on the realm of sensation, you're not going to get too far. Like that's where most people deal with cravings. It's like they just are in this realm of feeling, and then they feel the craving and they try and push the feeling away. And this is back to the white knuckling thing. So if you're not going to do that, what are you going to do? You have to engage your rational mind, and you do this by engaging in self-talk. That's the heart of it. You have to be able to tell yourself the truth. And a craving, and even in its raw sensational sense, is a lie. The craving only tells you one tiny piece of the story. And the craving tells you that if you do this thing, you will get a lot of pleasure. And that's one slice of the truth. It is true. It's like, yeah, that craving says, all right, if you jerk off right now, you'll feel really good. True. But it doesn't tell you all the negative consequences that come with it. That's the full picture, right? That's the full truth. And so you have to fill in that full truth with your rational mind. And so you got to tell yourself, you got to be like, hey man, I know you're really horny right now, but we're not going to do this. We're going to conquer No Nut November so that we can be part of the masculine elite, right? And because we're going to be the guys who rise to the top during this troubling time rather than, I don't know, sink to the dopaminergic gutter, I guess. And so you want to be talking to yourself about this kind of stuff. And sometimes it can go kind of deep. And this is where it goes into sort of the next point, is that like you got to value yourself enough here, right? Like a lot of guys, they're not just using porn to feel good in the moment. And you hit on this a little bit earlier, James, is that they use it as a status replacement. They use it because they're lacking social status, they're lacking relationship status, they're lacking financial status or career status or physical status or whatever. And they feel shitty about it. They feel not good enough. And so it's like, at a certain level, you got to just learn how to care for yourself better. You have to learn how to like actually address those issues. And part of that's going to be self-talk, being like, hey man, I know you just lost your job, or hey, I know you're struggling with this thing, but like porn's not going to make this better. It's actually going to make things worse. It's going to put you in a more dysfunctional state. And what we really need to do right now is maybe we need to go for a little walk, chill ourselves out, but then we got to maybe sit down and send out some resumes. That's really what's going to serve us. And doing stuff like that and giving yourself that kind of honest conversation is absolutely essential if you want to develop real self-control, really. And it's got to be able to go from just the proximal I'm triggered, all the way down to addressing your deeper insecurities.
Yeah, it's like all men are driven towards status biologically. So that as you said, it was right, of course, like social status, securing a girl, because that's the ultimate confirmation biologically, is that. And so, of course, there's no reason why you shouldn't do those things. And I personally, and I imagine Mark would too, encourage you to go and do those things. So, controlling for the unfortunate situations where, you lose your job, it's like, well, what you should have on the side, it gets difficult to talk because I know it's sensitive, but if you've got a wife there or you've got a girlfriend there or something, that should be what you fall back on rather than pornography. So if you're falling back onto pornography, that's almost a sign in a way to say, well, something's wrong with your relationship. Because whatever you do in many ways is kind of like a signal from your biology back to yourself as like a riddle to be like, okay, you're doing this. You don't know why you're doing this, but you're doing it. So to use that as feedback towards those status things that you desire that would confirm you biologically. Of course, it's difficult when you don't have those things. It's difficult under these conditions. It's difficult when there's all kinds of horrible things going on in your life, but that's generally what I would treat it as. So if I was personally received, say, like a porn craving, it would be like, okay, that's a signal. What's wrong? Right. Rather than I must indulge in this thing right now. It's like a moment, an invitation for consciousness, I'd say.
Right. And what you find, if we want to, I'm not going to get all into the mechanics of the self-talk, but like what ends up happening is that you can actually have a conversation with this part of you. It really starts by you telling the urge no. You say, no, we're not going to do this because, it's bad for us. We're going to do something better instead. And then your emotional mind will start coming back with other stuff. Once you get through the surface level rationalizations of, it's just one time, or, it doesn't matter. Eventually your emotional mind will be like, well, our life sucks. because reason XYZ. I'm upset because we had this crappy interaction with this person, or I'm upset because this thing didn't fall through. And that's where you start really getting to the gold, because that's the stuff that's actionable and fixable in some form or another. And if you can't fix it externally, you can fix it internally. And that's a lot of the adventure here. And that's why this process is so powerful for guys, because it forces them to confront so many layers of themselves, just by not jerking off, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, agreed. Completely agreed.
So, all right, final tip here for surviving No Nut November is that you got to find a way to keep your head in the game, because when you first start anything, there's always like a wave of enthusiasm. There's always this wave of motivation. But like, especially if you're actually doing well, you will stop thinking about it. Like, quitting porn is one of those things where if you do well, it incentivizes you to think about other things. But the problem is the conditioning doesn't disappear that quickly. And so if you're not thinking about what you're doing, you're not thinking, oh yeah, I'm following this routine and I'm practicing these things so that I don't watch porn. Well, if you stop thinking about all that, one autopilot craving comes up and hits you hard, you relapse. So you have to find a way to keep yourself thinking about this process. So journaling is really powerful. I have a full, journaling system called the Metascript method. You can get that by clicking the link below. That's probably one of the best things I've ever produced. A lot of guys really love that. So if you practice journaling every day around this, it will massively increase your awareness around this sort of thing and self-accountability. You can track your streak, which is, you check off a box every day, keeps you from forgetting about it. The best thing, though, is join some kind of community. There's multiple communities online. NoFap is a good one. I would stay away from the subreddit. That place is a cesspool of terrible information in general. The forums for NoFap are free and tend to be a bit better. Obviously, I've got my Vanguard community, which is just getting upgraded and revamped, and that, personally, obviously I'm biased, is the best place to go. But we've got a Discord too that's really thriving, and just keying into that kind of stuff is really powerful, because it becomes the alternative social dopamine hit, right? Like, instead of scrolling Reddit or Imgur, where you might stumble across some kind of triggering image, you're getting dopamine, but also you might get a super triggering hit of dopamine. Instead of doing that, you just scroll through your whatever community you choose. And that's really nice, because you're still getting the novelty, but you are doing it in a way that reinforces your goals. So that's really awesome. And obviously, to take it to the highest level is to get some kind of accountability. So that's why I run weekly mentoring calls. You could work with a coach or a therapist, or get an accountability buddy, and go at it like that. But these are just enough to get you started. But if you have these things in place, you're going to be miles ahead of, the other people who are just, trying to wing it. Basically, they're not going to get anywhere. I can almost guarantee that.
Yeah, if you've decided on your own volition, because it must be that way, that this is something that you want to do, because it involves status, you must do it with other people, or else you're going to be seriously lagging behind. So something like the Vanguard, I think I said in the last podcast, I used the Vanguard to make real life friends. I DM'd everyone who was in there in the early days. I was setting up, it wasn't Zoom back then, Skype, and I would talk to them, and that was so much better, because there's levels to it. Like, reading a text forum is kind of like, well, this isn't really helping. And I kind of get it in that way. It's like, no, join in and arrange calls in the Discord live, little voice channels and everything else like that. Get involved with other people, because that then confirms your status along the way, which is so essential to this type of thing. I really, really believe. I think that's apex, to be honest, mate.
Yeah, I think that personal connection piece, just scrolling something is one thing, but when you're building a rapport with someone, it's different. Like with the guys who come to the weekly calls, I learn their stories. I remember them. I can reference points from the last time we talked. I don't remember everything always perfectly, because I talk to a bunch of people each call, but I know the guys who do develop that continuity, they absolutely get way more out of it, and they make way better progress. And you can do that with anyone. It's just about building relationships. It's about breaking that isolation. People talk about how the opposite of addiction is connection. And I don't believe that. I think actually the opposite of addiction is truth. But probably the main supplement to that would be connection. Then is like that's the most important, additional nutrient you need to add to your diet in order to make sure that you really kick stuff like that. So what do you think? Any other big ones we should hit on, or you think that's enough to get people started?
I think that's probably enough. Good little starter pack there.
Yeah, so if you want more, like I said, check out the reboot regimen and the link below. If you want like the full masterwork, you're like super serious about this, then check out my Reforged Man course. That's about as good as it gets, where I take everything to the fullest degree, and lots of people love it. So speaking a little bit about connection and talking with people, I figured it'd be beneficial to talk a little bit about how to talk about politics, because we are approaching the 2020 U.S. election here, and things have never been more heated politically ever. I thought nothing was going to top 2016, but 2020 has been a whole nother level. Now, obviously, I don't know if it's obvious, I'm an American, so American politics are particularly this way, but would you say the same thing holds true across the pond, James?
What are you talking about, Mark? I'm an American too. What are you talking about?
You can't even do a cowboy accent. You still sound like a British
I had
boy.
that sitting there just in case you brought up America. Yes, it's very, very true over here. It peaked at Brexit, so that was 2016, and then the sort of partisan stuff has sort of died down a little bit. But even under like the whole lockdown politics, it's still pretty strong, and it's more at the moment government versus the people, which is not something I actually would have expected to see in England, since like 400 years ago. We had our American English Civil War and stuff like that. Things are weird, mate. Weird.
Yeah, it's really weird. You're in London. London's super locked down, right?
London's pretty locked down. The heaviest lockdown areas would be like Newcastle, like the northeast.
Is that where you're at? Are you really locked down or not?
I am, yeah. So I'm like Merseyside, Liverpool. That's heavily locked down. Manchester's heavily locked down. I think London's just beneath that, but still really tight.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like you and then Dan, the other guy who we work with. He's in Australia, and they're insanely locked down. They got like a straight up police state going out there and going ham on them. So it's like stuff's nuts, right? And then of course everyone's got different opinions about it, right? You've got in America, you're either pro-Trump, anti-Trump, hate Trump but still voting for him, hate Biden but still voting for him, and like this is causing a lot of problems in relationships. Like I'm seeing like relationships actually end. Like in my close friend group, I'm seeing people like actually break up long-term relationships because they disagree about politics. Our friend chat has never been more divided. There was one of my friends, and he was just saying stuff that I just didn't understand where on earth he could be getting his thought process from, and he wasn't like explaining it to me. And I kind of I lost my cool with him, and I said some stuff that I really like. I don't ever want to talk like that, but I did because I got too heated. I got too hot under the collar. And then there's been other spats and back and forth disagreements, people, really going off on each other. And this is like in a super tight knit friend group that's been together for years, and we've never had anything like this. And so like, I imagine some of you guys out there are experiencing similar things. I don't know, James, are you? I haven't actually asked you. Are you fighting with anybody, or has it been pretty even keel over for you?
To be completely honest, so I'm from the southeast. You can tell that from my voice. Things are very heated, like with individuals down there. But I come up here and it's like I go down the local pub. Not anymore, thank you, Boris. And no one really cares, to be honest with you. So I'm quite lucky here. It's okay. Standard. Everyone's just chill. They want their pints. 50 million of them. Many also want to go off and get some cocaine. Whatever floats your boat, dude. It's fine. And but no, it's all right.
Didn't you have like this probably wasn't this time period, but didn't you have like a professor like threaten you or something like that when you're at a bar? He overheard what you were like talking about or something?
Yeah, I was just talking about Brexit in a very, very nonchalant kind of way, because why should it be a taboo subject? And the guy, one of this, I think he was chemistry or physics professor, he turns over and like, what the hell are you talking about? And I'm like, I talked, we're talking about Brexit, and I supported Brexit. And he's like, what did you just say? And then I ask him, it's a little bit of a tease in a way, but it's like, what do you think about me now? Because I was tired of the bollocks that people would throw at me for daring to vote Brexit in a university campus. And he said, you are a Nazi and you should be lined up against the wall and shot because you've taken away my children's future. I'm like, whoa, you're a nasty, unpleasant individual. Whew. Goodbye. Deeply unpleasant.
Yeah, that's the thing that's crazy is that people are taking things to that level where it's like, yeah, you should suffer bodily harm if you disagree with me. And so I know many of you guys out there, you're dealing with similar sort of stuff. And so here are like the rules I came up with for myself when it's about entering into a political conversation. Rule number 1 is there needs to be an evaluation of whether this could be productive or not. Okay? Because sometimes just off the bat, you know that absolutely nothing good will come of you talking about politics. Sometimes you got a relative who's just an idiot. They don't know what they're talking about, and they will not be swayed by anything you say. No chance of productivity. Don't do it. Anytime you're talking politics on social media, can almost guarantee it will not be productive, and you shouldn't do it. Unless you're an activist, okay? So like if you're an actual activist and you're trying to like go out and change people's minds and you're trying to do stuff like that, that's a different story. I'm talking like rules for someone who wants to keep their relationships intact primarily, okay? So you always got to evaluate how productive something can be. And, there's nuance to this. Sometimes you feel like you need to speak up even if it won't be productive. Like I've been in situations where I would just like people were just saying stuff I thought was just outright wrong or like harmful, or I just like couldn't sit with myself by not saying something. In that case, you want to try and frame it in the most productive way you can and just being like, hey, I know I'm not going to change any minds, but I just like for my own conscience, I just have to tell you that I disagree with you for this reason. And I'm not super interested in changing your mind. You're probably not interested in changing my mind, but like, that's just the way it is. And sometimes you have to do that because if you don't speak up like that, then your silence can seem like assent. So you want to avoid that. But, there's a thought process that has to go into it before you blurt something out. Otherwise, shit might start getting thrown at each other over the dinner table, which you want to avoid. And with Thanksgiving coming up, you probably really want to avoid, especially since we might not even have a president by then. So things are going to be nuts with that.
Yeah, it's just like you've got no obligation for social cohesion if someone is flinging crap at you. No obligation whatsoever. You can walk away. Why would you have to, by obligation, give energy to that? Something I noticed was if I would truly sit down with someone one-on-one who vehemently disagreed, and I would say pace and lead them a little bit through the conversation, not go straight in and go, I like Donald Trump. Because they go, and start screeching at the floor. You pace and lead them through it. And then immediately that surface fluff, this is only some people, and it has to be like one-on-one. It would go away, and then the insecurities of the person would come out. And that's true no matter what side you're on. Because at the end of the day, no one wants to really sit there and argue about politics. In many ways, it's a big shit test to each other. There's usually something driving that kind of interaction to get a thing out of you, or I'm higher status than you, or something like that. It's like, you don't have to have time for that. But if you were so inclined, that there is hope, I think, for most people. That's just my personal experience. For sure. I don't know what it's like in America, though.
One-on-one interaction is absolutely different. Social, like as soon as there's a crowd and there's social points to be gained, so like social media in general, people are not trying to actually have a real conversation. They're trying to earn points and look good, and that's an issue in general. That's in general what's happening. So this leads me to my next rule: is like no text arguments, no arguing with people via text about politics, because there is just too much nuance for any of it to be properly conveyed via text. And this is where all the, the fights and stuff happened in my friend group was through text disagreements, because sometimes it's just a matter of people being bad linguistically, but then or just like not being able to communicate the tone and the tenor of what they wanted to say or do via text. Like part of the reason why I was not happy with the way I showed up with my one friend was because in the moment I said it in one tone, like in my head, But then when I read it back later, it read entirely differently. And I was like, oh shit, I didn't mean it like that, but it definitely seemed like that. So like that's one of the big issues with text. And then beyond that, just like the level of resolution that you're really going to get into is just so minimal, especially if it's any sort of short form sort of thing. If you're like writing actually, the more long form it gets, the even more in the weeds you get into, because it's like someone will write a big long thing, but you had a problem with their very initial premise, and so they wasted all that time. You didn't read it, and then you write them a big long thing back. They have a problem with your initial premise, and then you're just wasting time throwing shit at each other. So it's like, stay away from text if you're going to have an actual disagreement and you like need to have the disagreement. Keep that for over the phone or in person.
Yeah, so you can imagine like someone sends in a text to you and you read it and it's like, okay, you're clearly just trying to persuade me of something. So then you try and defend yourself, but it's exactly the same thing, vice versa. Really, if you're reflective in the moment, it becomes a waste of time. Like, who's ever won sincerely like a Facebook text wall argument? No one's done it. It's the biggest waste of time I could possibly imagine.
Right.
What's the point?
Right. It's a real big waste of time. So next tip is you want to make sure if you are going to do the conversation, you are going to get into it, and there is times to do that, you want to properly frame the conversation. So if I was going to go and disagree deeply with someone I cared about politics, I would do it from the place of like, hey, first off, I love you. I respect you. And number one thing is I just want to understand where you're coming from. And I would like to share, maybe what I think too, and we could maybe try and find some common ground. And if you're both good people and you're approaching it in good faith, like you can do that almost always. And this is key because it's like you should be able to find, like they should have some good sentiment that they're trying to support, right? And if you can find that and work with that, then the conversation can stay usually pretty civil and sometimes even productive. Where it's not going to go well is if you come at it from the mentality of like a winner versus a loser, like you're fighting for a win. When you frame the conversation like that, I mean, even if you do win, the other person is going to feel like shit and they're going to be mad at you, right? Like if say you know more facts or you're better just rhetorically and you make them, shut up and run away, you didn't change their mind. You just made them not like you. So you always want to try and set the frame for the conversation in a productive way, build upon mutual respect and whatnot.
Yep. And a huge amount of that is social skills, persuasion. It's like if Edward Bernays can convince an entire generation of women to take up smoking when it wasn't for women beforehand, I'm sure that you can convince your friend that you're not an evil, racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever else. You can do it.
Yeah. And this leads into the next point where it's like, all right, you want to try and represent your side well, meaning like not just your facts and logic and whatever. You want to do that obviously to the best of your ability, but really what you want to do is you want to conduct yourself in a way where people can't dismiss you because of your character. And this is the kind of stuff that happens all the time. It's like, I disagree with this person, so they should be shot. It's like, whoa, okay. Anything else I don't care about anything else you said. Like that behavior automatically like puts you in the moron category. And that's what I'm saying is like, don't put yourself in the moron category. And like the ways that people do this a lot is they always like, they just start name calling like right off the bat. It's like Donald Trump or like, I mean, they're for both sides, right? Like people saying, "Oh, Orange Man bad. You're afraid of Donald Trump." It's just like it goes both ways. It's like as soon as you start like name calling, you're showing disrespect for the other person. And if you're trying for that productive conversation, it's not going to happen, right? It's not going to work. So like, conduct yourself in such a way where it's like if someone was standing as a third party and they didn't know anything about the topics that were being discussed, behave like someone where they would just pick you because you're the more congenial good person. Like try and do it like that, where it's like if someone was just going to be like the way that guy conducts himself, the way that he structures his arguments, the way that he maintains respect, I don't know anything about it, but I'm going to go with him because I like his mannerism. Like that's key, because if you can go at it like that, then the only thing that's going to piss them off is your logic. And if your logic is pissing them off, then that's really their problem. Unless your logic is flawed, then that's your problem. But
Yep, I completely agree with you on that. I have nothing else to add on that.
okay. Here's a quick one. Prioritize values and principles over source trading. Meaning, like, if there's a disagreement about something, don't just be like, well, this article said this. And then they're going to come back, well, this article said this. The problem is that, like, there's so much fake news and bullshit and partisan, like, politics, and, like, no one's really reading the articles. They're just reading the headlines, that if you're just trying to win through citing articles that say your side's right, that's real tricky to do. It's real tricky to do. It's almost better off to avoid those kinds of conversations in general. You're better off sticking to the more personal, value-driven conversations about, like, what's important to you, right? Like, instead of, like, did Donald Trump collude with Russia? Okay. Instead of doing that, be like, okay, if you're pro-Trump, it would be like, well, you know, why you support him, why you personally find him worth your vote, or personally find him not worth your vote, or whatever. And if you can like stick to the stuff that's 100% certain, like your opinions or your perception of things, it's far less arguable than if you're getting into the weeds. Now, sometimes it can definitely be useful to get clear, and especially when there's hoaxes that are used all the time that are just actually not true. For sure, share those things. But when you don't really know for certain, probably should stay away from source trading.
Yeah. Try your very, very best to stay away from the whole thing anyway, is also what I'd add into it as well. It's like there'll be some issues that you care about, but when it's an entire party versus another, it's like I'd be suspicious that that's really what's driving you there. If you bring it down to a more psychology level, it's like, what's motivating the conversation? Indeed, what's motivating your conversation to engage in the first place across the full range of all the different types of that type of conversation you could have. That's more fun, that's more engaging, because I mean, presumably from your experience as well, mate, 99% of it is a complete waste of time. So why buy into it? Because also people are profiting off of this as well. It's like you're profiting off of my energy. It's like, you know, we complain about ads and stuff from like Amazon and Facebook and everything. They're profiting off of my actions.
Right.
It's like, well, yeah, the political system and all these newspapers and everything else, they're profiting off of it. So it's like, why? It's my energy. Go away.
I know.
You know?
I know. Yeah. And so, like, that's why things have gotten so crazy, is because people, you know, these companies are incentivized to put the most outrageous shit out there to get clicks. And that's what's causing all this, like, divide. So just be careful of that. And so I got 3 more, and I'll go through them quickly. All right. This one's important. This one's particularly important if you want me to pay attention to you. And this is, you want to avoid straw manning their arguments and instead steel man them. So straw manning is when you misrepresent their argument and you try and make it sound dumber than it actually is. And some people who are rhetorically unskilled, it's really easy to do that to them. Don't do it, because they know what they really mean, even if they can't communicate it super well. So it's like, if you just reduce their argument to some absurd position, then you're completely missing the point. Like, so for example, someone who says, someone who supports Trump's immigration policy, if you just say, oh, well, clearly you're racist and like you hate Mexicans or something like that. It's like, that's entirely a straw man. That's not what they think at all. That's not even why they support the policy, or they support, you know, the wall or whatever. You have to actually understand their side of things. And that's what steel manning is. Steel manning is where, like, you look at what they believe and you take the strongest version of their argument and you try and argue against that. And if you can't do that, then don't argue, because you don't know enough or you're wrong. So it's like, always fight the steel man battle. It'll make you seem more respectful, and they will actually enjoy the process. And, you know, that's where the real productive stuff comes, where you're trying to help them form their argument even better. And then at that point, it becomes really, it's just a pursuit of truth then. It's not about winning. And if you can find someone who's mutually interested in that, that is the only kinds of productive conversations I've had politically ever.
Yeah, if you've got an idea that's not been pressure tested, there's no point having the idea. Because it's not really it's probably not your idea in the first place, and there's no point. It's not serving you, because it will crumble under the weight of anything significant. So, you know, it's just taking up dead space in your head, really.
Yeah. So this next one here is sometimes you're not gonna be able to do any of this stuff. And this kind of is an echo of the first point of like the productiveness evaluation. But like sometimes you're gonna find that people are just brainwashed, or they're, just emotionally reacting, and there's no way to reach them. And maybe they're even in your face about the politics and stuff like that. Like I've had a guy on the Vanguard whose like sister kind of attacked him because he didn't do what she wanted him to do to support her side of things. And so it's like in those kinds of scenarios, what you got to do is you got to pity those people. You have to actually feel sorry for them. You don't give in to them. You don't get mad at them unless they're, really doing something bad to you that warrants a more significant response. But like you mostly you just got to feel bad. You got to pity them. Just be like, I'm sorry you're broken in this way. I'm sorry you're so uninformed. I'm sorry XYZ. And I don't necessarily mean say that to them, but that's how you have to hold it. You have to find genuine compassion, because if they could see themselves from the outside, they probably wouldn't like what they see either. And they're likely in a lot of pain to have gotten themselves to that point. They have some kind of deficiencies that are causing them pain in other areas of their life. And, when you adopt that mentality and you can feel bad for them, it really takes a lot of the anger out of the situation or frustration out of it.
Yeah, it's like you're a scientist at that point in many ways, and not even in like a cold way. It's like, I see what's going on here. Yeah, I like that. I like that, because even if someone is a libtard, or if someone is I don't even know what a phrase would be, a racist, we'll go with that. No matter what side that you choose, it's like it's still a human being that's being driven to say those things. And it's like it's not going to be personal. They're possessed by whatever the hell they're talking about. It's probably a sad thing. It's like, well, I just wanted to be right, or whatever. People can have legitimate arguments, and people can be passionate for good reasons. It's not what we're saying. But there's something about politics that seems to generate, within a cultural context, venom flying at both sides from each other. And it is both sides, regardless of whether or not the left has a monopoly over the media and everything else. In everyday interactions, it is. Like I'm in a more, say, like right-wing conservative area, and I've seen a lot of venom go towards the left-wing guys. And it's like, but this conversation is also a waste of time. We're just patting each other on the back and going like, oh yeah, we're so great. I get that. I'm not going to regulate your pub conversation, but also don't complain like they're all the dickheads and you're super smart. Right. It's not true.
Right. There's smart people on both sides. There's dumb people on both sides. There are issues and tendencies that cluster to one side or the other. And those are real, and they definitely matter. But like, you got everyone's humans at the end of the day. And this leads me to my final point here, is that if you really want to be okay with doing this and you really want to handle it well, you got to have more in your life than politics, because it's the people who go whole hog on politics. They're on Twitter all day long, Facebook. They're just following everything, retweeting, arguing, doing this kind of stuff, and that's all they have. Then if they lose the political argument, then they've lost everything. Or if someone disagrees with them politically, that person has zero space in their life, because politics is all consuming for them. And so it's like, if you want to be able to maintain diverse friendships, then you have to have something more. Otherwise, like, that's going to be the filter upon which you view everyone. And that's kind of see what I think is happening in some regard, is that like people are falling into these echo chambers, these ideological echo chambers, where they're cutting out huge swaths of the population, many amazing, wonderful people, simply because they don't agree with them. And so, don't do that. Don't do that. We live in a crazy world. Let's say you're right. Okay, say you're right and everybody else is wrong. Well, or everybody who disagrees with you is wrong. Maybe that's the actual truth. You got to have some compassion. This comes to the pity part. It's like, all right, the media is more confusing. The world is more confusing. Things are tougher and more strange than they've possibly ever been in humanity. So like, give people some leeway to screw things up. Doesn't mean that we just keep trying to screw things up and we condone badness. I'm just saying, like, you got to have more. You have to have a bigger perception of your life and humanity as a whole than just the political stuff. So, yeah.
There are two things that are upsetting the people in the live chat. People keep saying that we're pre-recorded, but they're arguing about politics, which I find quite funny. and then they're also, some of them are being quite upset that you're not also reading the chat and presumably getting involved in the political discourse. So I don't know what you want to say to that, mate.
Yeah, I don't do text conversations about politics, guys. I already told you that. That was the rule. And if you're doing that right now, you're already failing. If you guys are really interested in it, let me know in the comments for the video when it's actually posted. I could talk politics. We could actually talk like specifics. I've been relatively neutral so far, but I feel like if you really want to get into it, that's absolutely something we could do. That maybe be a fun thing. Talk. Maybe let me know what are the biggest topics you'd like me to talk about politically. Like, I'm no political pundit. I'm not an expert in that regard at all, but I'm pretty good at understanding values and like what I value more than others. And so, if you guys want to do that sometime, let's do it. But right now, we got to wrap things up here because I actually have a coaching client here in a few. But really fun time here, guys. I appreciate you tuning in. How many people did we actually get come in here? We got,
I think it peaked around 200 or so.
Oh, nice.
144 at the moment.
Well, nice. Well, I appreciate all you guys watching. Make sure you sign up for my daily email. You can do that by clicking any of the links below to get one of my free guides. I've got the new Vanguard that's been launched. I'm really hyped on that. You can check that out, membership.universalman.com. It's got all kinds of cool things with it. Reforged Man's probably going to pump a sale for that next month in honor of NoNut November. So if you want that, make sure you're on the mailing list. And other than that, keep winning, my friends. Thank you so much for coming out. Anything you want to say to sign things off for us, James?
No, mate. Just I appreciate you, Mark, and appreciate everybody else in their political discourse.